I gotta be honest with y'all, LTMs are just not hitting the same, at least for me. This is a weird conversation because I have been advocating for the return of more LTMs for the last couple of years. You gotta think, we went for the first, 3 to 4 years of Fortnite's history with consistent LTMs. And then all of a sudden, Chapter 4 hits, and we got absolutely nothing. And the wild thing was, at first, we didn't even notice it. It was just like something was missing, but what was it? And then I think after the first 2 seasons, everyone's like, when's the last time we've had an LTM? And everyone started to miss them from that point forward. Then you go to Chapter 5, and Epic started sprinkling a few of them in, and they were okay for what they were. It started giving a lot of us hope and making us realize, hey, Epic might actually be getting their momentum back. Fast forward to Chapter 6, and now we've gotten 2 LTMs over the course of the last couple of months in this current season. The thing is, when you go back and you play some of these old LTMs, you start to realize this isn't as much fun as it used to be, at least from my perspective. And I'm wondering if anybody else feels the same way. I really wanted to sit down and think about this because I think that LTMs have a place inside of Fortnite. I don't think that creative takes the place of them, nor do I think that the metaverse modes take the place of LTMs. But I do think that those things have kind of made it to where LTMs aren't as exciting as they used to be. See, the thing is, Fortnite as a game has changed so much since LTMs were first introduced. Back when we got the first LTM, 50v50, it was a big deal because at that time, the only things that you had that you could play were Save the World and Main BR. And remember, there was just one version of it. It was just builds. There was no zero builds yet. And so when you get this third thing it's like, whoa, a bonus mode. That's kind of exciting. And it's only going to be here for a little bit of time. Well, let's try it out. And everybody loved it because we were already excited with the idea of what Fortnite was, this BR experience. But now you guys are going to make like little mini games for us to try every now and then. That's cool. LTMs definitely felt like more of an event because there was less in the game. And it's one of those weird things to say, but it's like the more things that get added to Fortnite, sometimes it feels like the less enjoyable some things are. Like, just for me personally, how am I going to be as excited about something like 50v50 when I've got things like reload inside the game? Now, granted, I understand those are two completely different experiences. I love 50v50 for what it is, and I absolutely love reload. It is the best thing to happen to Fortnite. If you don't believe me, go watch my last video. But the thing is, 50v50 and some of the other LTMs that we've had over the last few years, they just don't scratch that itch when it comes to what I'm looking for from Fortnite now. I think one of the things that we have to realize outside of the game changing is our tastes as gamers have changed as well. Like, the things that used to get us excited aren't going to get us excited anymore. It's crazy. Like, people always go to the brain rot argument, like, yes, you have TikTok brain, but to a certain degree, there is a bit of truth to that. Like, I think our dopamine receptors are just blown to hell because we've been exposed to so much consistent content from Fortnite. There's just something every week. And although we're getting a bunch of stuff, it doesn't feel as satisfying, at least for some of us older players, because we've been exposed to so many different eras of this game. Now, this is where I think LTMs are nice. I do think that for like a lot of the new players that never experienced some of these old LTMs, I think it is kind of a novelty for them. But I do think with how Fortnite is currently, I think there was a better way that they could have introduced some of these older LTMs and made it more exciting. But because of the presence of Fortnite OG, that's been somewhat ruined, but we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, the points I just brought up are pretty subjective. Like, those are not going to be things that are problems for everyone. But where I do think the big problem with some of the old LTMs is that they just feel outdated. For example, when the getaway mode was brought back recently, there were a lot of things that stood out to me that just didn't feel right. The first time I played it, it was in zero builds, and I think that that was a mistake. Getaway really is designed for builds mode, which the vast majority of LTMs are. Most of Fortnite's LTMs were designed at a time when builds was the only thing conceivable. No one had thought about playing Fortnites in a zero builds format. That has its own issues, but once again, we're gonna move that to the side for a conversation later on. Getting back to the getaway, the things that stood out to me the most that just felt out of place, number one, was the pacing of the game. The rounds ended way too quick. And interesting enough, I wasn't really getting into a lot of fights, at least for the first few matches that I played. And it wasn't just because there were bots inside the game. It's just that people were so spread out on the island. Honestly, I think the average time for most of my getaway rounds was about 10 minutes, if that. Like, most of the time, people had completed the rounds super fast. And the rounds that we won didn't really feel rewarding. Like, there would be rounds we would play, I think we would win within the first 5 minutes. Like, sometimes you were able to get to a van that was uncontested, or even if it was contested, it wasn't contested by enough people. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we had the opposite problem. Like, sometimes you were contested a lot, but the way in which we were contested didn't feel good either. Like, this loot pool that they gave us, the Chapter 6 loot pool, is not a good one for Getaway. Like, to be specific here, having a sticky grenade launcher in a mode like Getaway is a mistake. I understand that people are going to shoot me out, but when you just have a whole team of people spamming sticky grenades at me while my friends and I are trying to build up, it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel rewarding to play that. As an opponent, it's not rewarding just to be able to spam people and their builds to try to knock them down. I want to have to build up to them and contest the fight. That way we can use the better team at the end of this epic build battle. Finally, the last thing, and this is more of a nitpick, but I just feel like this mode would have been better on the OG island. Something about experiencing Getaway on the Chapter 6 island just didn't sit right. It didn't feel as good to me, but once again, that's my bias as an OG player that played the original version of this game. Now, to be fair to Epic, they actually fixed this with the next LTM that dropped, which was 50v50. As a matter of fact, last week, I actually participated in the 50v50 face-off, which was a lot of fun. This mode feels right at home on the OG island, and I honestly think that's where a lot of the older LTMs should be placed. And to that point, I honestly think that a lot of the LTMs would have felt a lot more special if we didn't have OG back as a permanent mode. Hear me out for a second. Over the last few months, we've had conversations about the OG mode splitting the player base even further, and it's proven to do that, right? Like, OG is directly competing with the Chapter 6 Battle Royale. One of the things that I proposed initially was, instead of making OG a permanent mode, they should make the OG mode an LTM. But the other thing that would have been cool, after going through the effort of them remaking the entire OG Chapter 1 island, is having specific LTMs from those time periods come back for people to play on. Think about it. Imagine if instead of having the permanent OG mode, every other week you had a different LTM that was an OG experience. So you could have the 50v50 or the Getaway and use loot pools that existed around that time, and people could still get somewhat of an OG experience that would be unique and different from Battle Royale, but it wouldn't interfere with the OG concept or the OG nostalgia being bombarded with that too much. And look, if they wanted to, they could still do OG passes. Every couple of weeks, swap out a different LTM, or maybe even throw in a different OG season as an LTM for a week, however you want to do it, and let people level up to their battle pass that way. You're still giving people an OG experience, but it's not giving them the Battle Royale 24/7. That still keeps the OG Island special because you're interacting with it in a different way with every iteration of a different LTM. It keeps the OG Battle Royale experience special because you're not giving people that consistently every week, and there's an added layer of excitement because you don't know what LTM or OG experience you're going to get. But getting back to 50v50, when I'm looking at that game mode, the play pattern of that also feels a little stale to me. When the mode first came out, the biggest problem was having to go up against bots. Now, to be fair to Epic, it did not take them long to correct this, because I think after maybe like 1 or 2 days, there actually was a decrease in the amount of bots that were playing the game mode. I went back to play it again for myself before the tournament started, and it was better, but it's not something that I'm going to go out of my way to play very often. It's something I'll try maybe once or twice, and then I'm going to go back to my main BR playlist. Now, I want to make something very clear here. Just because I have critiques about Getaway or 50v50, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be in Fortnite. However, I think what they do need is a revamp, an update, a rework that fits the modern player base and the modern play style. The thing is, outside of the player base and the game just being drastically different from what it was when these LTMs first came out, we've also had a lot of quality of life updates that have been made since the initial inception of these modes as well. Think about how much different movement is now compared to how it was 5 or 6 years ago. We can sprint inside of Fortnite now. We can mantle, climb, slide. There's a lot of different movement options as compared to the initial vanilla OG release of Fortnite. That by itself changes the pace of the gameplay. Fights are more dynamic and are more action-packed, but the problem is these game modes don't always reflect that. For example, the reason why Getaway rounds are ending so quickly is because people can just naturally move faster. So here's the thing, if Epic is going to bring back some of these older modes, I think they should take into consideration how they might need to be updated for the modern player. And here are a couple suggestions that I have. When we're looking at something like 50v50, for example, I think that there needs to be some kind of reload mechanic. What do I mean by that? I think players should have the ability to respawn infinitely, at least until the final version of the zone. So that last circle that ends up getting smaller and smaller, you should be able to respawn up until that point. The reason for this is twofold. If you're not playing 50v50 with your friends, there's a good chance that your teammates probably aren't going to revive you with the reboot ban. I know they do it, I've had people do it to me, but it's a long and slow process, and a lot of players are probably just going to end up backing out or quitting, or your teammates aren't going to take the time to actually get you up. The other thing too is you want the fight at the end to be as big and bombastic as possible. So giving everybody the chance to be there at that last circle for the chaos to ensue is the best possible option to allow everyone to have the most amount of fun for this game mode. Another mechanic that I think would be really cool to add would be like a jailbreak. Like give the lobby a 20% chance of allowing all the players to come back sometime during that end zone. That could potentially keep players on longer as well. I honestly think if you add these mechanics in, you don't really need reboot vans, and I think it'd be a more fun experience for everybody playing. Like that final zone is going to be far more intense because you know, like, okay, there are no more reboots here. I have to survive as long as possible. Also, let me say this right now. When we had that 50v50 face-off with all the content creators a couple of weeks ago, that's what made it really intense, was having basically an entire lobby full of people in that end circle. When you're playing in pub lobbies, you don't always have that luxury. The Getaway uses similar treatment to its gameplay as well. Outside of adding reload respawn mechanics, I think the thing that would benefit this mode the most is a rework to their van system, the one that you actually have to get away in. One thing that I think made the Getaway gameplay so stale is that the vans only stay on one section of the map forever. I think it would be better if there was like a time limit that you had to access that van, and if no one reached the van within a certain time frame, it would teleport to a different part of the island. Outside of adding a new layer of intensity by having that timer looming over your head being like, hey, you got to get to this location in this amount of time, as well as escape, it would also give different groups of players more of an opportunity to get away, because you might be on one section of the island where no vans exist, but there's this one van that's been present here the whole time, and only the teams that landed on that side of the map are able to get to it. This will make people move around the map a lot more, creating more fights that people can get into. Like I said before, one of the big problems with Getaway is that some of the rounds you just don't get into any fights at all, and you just end up climbing up and escaping. That's not exciting, but if you make those vans move around the map at random, it'll just make for a more interesting gameplay experience. I also don't think that more than 2 vans should be present on the map at a time. So what that does is it forces more people to have to fight for less targets, which means for bigger, more bombastic fights. And once again, if none of the teams can get to the van in time, the van will spawn to a different section of the island. Once again, the whole point of this is to make the rounds last longer, make the fights more intense, and give you more consistent fights. Getaway as a concept is cool because there's a clear objective to fight for. There's a clear purpose in every ounce of gameplay, but I think that that needs to be tweaked just a little bit for the modern Fortnite player base. Now let me say this, not all LTMs need an update. There are some ones that we got brought back, like for example, the floor is lava, or what was it, that ship it one that we got for Christmas? I didn't get to play that, but that was basically just catch. Those are LTMs that are always going to be fun because of what they are, just due to the fact that the concepts are so simple. But there's not really a lot you can do to add to the floor is lava or even catch, right? Like it's just kind of what that thing is. The only area where you run into issues with these is sometimes these experiences are not best suited for zero builds. There is no way you can make a zero builds version of the floor is lava and make it feel like the same game. Maybe if you had random platforms that would appear and people could climb on top of and give people bunks, that would be interesting, but that's not the same experience as the original Fortnite floor is lava. Doesn't mean that they shouldn't try to experiment with it though. If they want to make a zero builds version, they can do it, but they're gonna have to go through some big stretches. These modes were really designed for a build experience. Same thing with 50v50. Honestly, I think 50v50 would probably be too chaotic in a zero builds format. Part of what makes 50v50 fun is the fact that it kind of gets you back to old Fortnite. Like, you have a bunch of people sitting on top of a hill, making a giant fort, waiting for the next team to attack them. That is neat. That is OG Fortnite in a nutshell, and it's lost in modern BR. There are probably other LTMs that exist that probably wouldn't be good for a zero builds format, but I just can't think of them right now because I quite frankly don't know them. I think there's like well over 50 Fortnite LTMs, but I think the vast majority of them could work on both builds and zero builds. The thing that Epic needs to be aware of though is just splitting the player base too much. And that's kind of what sucks with modern Fortnite. Because we've got builds and zero builds as two viable primary battle royale experiences, you kind of have to try to make things that appease both players. Like, think about it. People that play primarily zero builds have only played zero builds that want to try out 50v50. Well, now they've got to experiment with building for the first time, and a lot of people may not be comfortable with that. Now, listen, if you're like me, you're gonna be like, listen, Johnny, get over it. This is just the way that this game is played. If you don't like it, go play something else. But I think that you do kind of need to keep those players in mind. Or at the very least, just be aware of splitting the player base when it comes to the new LTMs that get brought in. See, this is another thing we didn't have to think think about before in the old days of the original LTMs. There was no other BR-based mode. It was just Battle Royale, builds. That was it. So when you got an LTM, well, now the player base is split between main BR and then the one LTM mode. But now, for a lot of these LTMs, you're going to have 2 different versions. Another thing that I think really sucks when it comes to splitting the player base with the LTMs is adding a ranked mode. Epic, listen, I love you guys, but we do not need a ranked mode for everything. However, what I do think you should do is have more tournaments. For example, the 50v50 face-off tournament, let's say that had started right before the mode was officially released, or the very first day that the mode was launched, and they had invited 100 content creators to play in that to generate hype. Then after the tournament, and everybody is watching all these content creators play, people are going into the LTM experience, having a blast, enjoying themselves, trying to replicate what they just saw in the tournament from the content creators. Then at the end of 1 week to 2 weeks, however long you have the LTM for, you have a tournament for the casual player base, something that gives them some kind of free reward, something exclusive for participating in the tournament, something that says, hey, I was here for this thing. It gives them something to look forward to, and it makes them feel more excited about participating in the overall LTM experience because they've had 2 weeks to plan and prepare for this fun tournament that they're going to do with their friends. So basically, it's like one big LTM sandwich. You got a tournament for the content creators, you bring out the official LTM, and you got a tournament for the casuals at the tail end of it where everyone can just have fun. This, I think, would be a better way to roll out LTMs in the future just to generate more hype, but also ties back into something else that we said in a previous video, which is giving the community, the casual community, more things that they feel like they're a part of. I think it's awesome that Epic invited me to become part of the 50v50 face-off. That was a fun experience. Me, iTalk, Dag, we had a blast going up against some of our other friends in the community. Honestly, I think we need more stuff like that. And the fact that they did that is a good sign that Epic might be putting on more events like this in the future. And you know what? While we're looking towards the future, one thing that I'm hoping Epic does is bringing back more of the fan-favorite LTMs. Things like Food Fight, Imposters, Close Encounters, Sneaky Snipers, Sniper One-Shot. Most are either self-contained experiences, kind of like Imposters, or things that are just very simple loot pool changes like Close Encounters where it's all just shotguns and jetpacks. Finally, the last thing I would really love to see from Epic moving forward when it comes to LTMs is doing more collab-focused stuff. We thought we were going to be getting a Mortal Kombat LTM. I don't know whether it was canceled or we just assumed it was the case because of that little trailer that we saw, but I think they were just advertising the new items being put into BR as well as the POIs. But I think adding in more collab-based LTMs would make people more excited about engaging with the IP. Like, for example, when Avatar: The Last Airbender came out, instead of making the LTM take over the entire Greek-themed season, put all the Avatar mythics inside of its own LTM where you can literally become the Avatar for an entire round. So you have earth, water, air, fire bending. You put all those things in your inventory and it's a battle royale experience where you're trying to become the #1 Avatar by the end of it. Now they tried to do something like this last year with the Day of Doom mini event, but once again, that was just one of those things that kind of fell flat for me. It didn't really feel as good as something like Marvel Knockout did. I think what people really wanted from Epic and Marvel at that time was balls to the wall, all out superpowers. And I'm talking about adding in everything, not just the powers from that season, not just the powers from Chapter 2, Season 4, but also every other Marvel item you had, like the Spider-Man web slingers or the Venom mythics, the Magneto gloves. Throw in all your Marvel-based superpowers into one mode and make people fight off Dr. Doom's army. However, where your players feel like they can become their favorite Marvel superhero or villain. Now listen, don't just stop at collabs when it comes to creating new LTM experiences. Also do that for your modern BR players. This is the perfect chapter to do this. I think it'd be really cool if Epic made an LTM where it was just all melee-based weapons. So you've got your kneecap or your Typhoon blade, but throw in the Shockwave hammer, throw in the kinetic blade. You know what? If Epic doesn't do that, I will. Stay tuned for that. Guys, I love y'all. I appreciate this little conversation we had today about LTMs, but I want to know from you, how are you feeling about the current state of them right now? What would you change? What would you add? What LTMs do you want to have come back? Are you feeling like me? Do you feel like LTMs are just kind of stale as they are right now? And as always, thank you to Epic Games for just bringing them back more consistently. I'm not mad at the fact that the LTMs are back, but I do think that a lot of them just need a bit of a revamp. But let's see what the community thinks. Love y'all. Catch you in the next one. Peace out.